Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for Monday Night Football between the Eagles and the Packers. Going to get you ready for all of your exposure tonight. But first off, a breakdown of the DraftKings side and what we're doing for our single game lineups. That'll include an injury report, some GPP ownership, some of my favorite captain plays and game scripts that I'll be utilizing in my exposure. And then afterwards, we're going to focus on the prop and the betting side of things with our top underdog and prize picks props that I've already mixed in. A few pieces of value from that perspective that you might want to consider tailing for yourself. So a lot to go through here. Let's not waste any time at all. It started off with first off a breakdown of the DraftKings DFS side. The spread tonight's 1.5 points towards the Packers, which is going to lead to a lot of 3-3 lineups. And anytime we have such a close spread, people have a lot of trouble really having conviction towards one team or the other. So if you play a more differentiated 4-2, perhaps with a running back at captain, defense played alongside with them, or a 5-1 towards either team, you're going to be instantly different to what the rest of the field is doing. So if you plan on playing in a contest with over 10,000 entries and it has that GPP payout structure where it's super top heavy, that's the kind of strategy that I would be going with. But it's a close spread for a reason. I tend to agree with Vegas on a lot of the lines that we see throughout the year, and this is one of the ones where I think it makes a lot of sense. You've got two defensive-minded teams, two teams that on paper match up pretty evenly, so that 1.5 point spread, likely because the Packers are the home team, is something that I wouldn't give too much pushback on. So single entries in cash, I think it's okay to go with that 3-3, or maybe a chalkier passing-led 4-2 in either direction, but large show GPPs, which is where I get a lot of my exposure, primarily a vast majority of what I enter for the Showdown contest, I'm going to have to get pretty nasty with it. And when you're entering a 5-1 towards either of these teams, the lineup is going to look disgusting. It's going to look gross on paper, but that's what you want in those large show GPPs, because the grosser it looks, the less likely that other people are going to be entering it. And although it'd be nice to have a close competitive shootout here, all of us football fans want to see that as a more competitive sort of affair. It doesn't always work out that way. And the Thursday night football games are probably the most infamous for giving us those stinkers, but it happens on Monday night and Sunday night football as well. So that's what I'll be playing for in the large field contest. Cashless single entries, I think you can be a little bit chalkier about it, but I wouldn't even be opposed to getting some leverage with some 4-2s. But let's start up top with Jalen Hurts at $11,000. He's got a 19-point projection, which I actually think is pretty conservative for my end. There's a chance that that gets raised by the time that we get closer to lock. Still a 1.7x points per dollar value, and he's getting some ownership at about 65%. But what you'll note about Hurts is that he's typically much higher owned than that. He's typically projecting a lot better as well. Over the last month and a half, he has not been rushing as much. And my theory on that is that they want to save him for the playoffs. If you're rushing the ball 10 to 12 times per game, especially early in the year, you're going to have a high chance of having an injury. Whereas if you save yourself early, especially against some teams that maybe aren't as strong, as the year goes on and as the games ramp up in importance, you could start to fully unleash a Jalen Hurts. And you saw it week one, he had the 2 rushing touchdowns, ran it like 12 times for like 80 yards or something, but has not done that since. And I think this game against the Packers is where we might see him get a little bit more of that rushing usage because it's such a big game for the seeding in that conference. Also, two of the really Super Bowl contenders that we have in 2025. This game really matters this evening. So I think Hurts should be projecting perhaps even better than what we have there. And at 65% total ownership, I think there's some leverage to be had. And because he is a rushing quarterback, you can play him naked in a few spots. But in a showdown format where you don't have to have an absolute nutted performance to make the optimal, something, with at least one pass catcher is going to be utilized a lot more than when he's in there naked. Next up, we got a Saquon Barkley at $10,800, a 1.6x points per dollar projection, which doesn't stand out as much as it typically does on Saquon because of the tough defensive matchup. We've got one of the top 5, top 10 defenses across the board on the Packers, whether it's against the rush or against the run. They're a pretty stout bunch across the board, and he's expensive at $10,800. And to pay off that kind of a price tag, we need a 20-plus fantasy point performance. And, I'm not expecting this to be like a 25-point total or a 30-point total. If that's the case, maybe he gets away with something closer to 15 or 16 points, but any remote chance of just normal scoring in this game, he's going to need a 20-plus point performance. So I think if you're going to use him, the best spot to do it is at captain and perhaps in the large show GPPs for some of that differentiation, because as I mentioned before, if you go with a 5-1, that will give you all the leverage you're hoping for, but even a 4-2 with like a Barkley at captain or a Josh Jacobs at captain on the other side, and then pairing them up with their respective defense is how you can start to get to a 4-2 that has a little lower combined ownership than some of the ones that are a bit more passing heavy. Speaking of the rushing game, Josh Jacobs at $10,600 is also a bit expensive. He probably has to get to at least 20 fantasy points to get to the optimal lineup, but he's capable of doing so if they're playing from ahead. These running backs, the reason why I want to play them in 4-2 or 5-1 lineups for the most part, especially at captain, is because if they're playing from ahead and they're in that positive game script, those are the scenarios where you see them getting 20 to 25 touches. And to post 20 plus fantasy points, you normally need, at least for running backs, about 1 point per touch is what you can project for. So those two players, that's where I'll be using a lot of them tonight. And I think, especially if you're playing the GPPs like I will be, they should be a pretty big piece of your exposure. A Jordan Love at 10 grand is also pretty expensive, but I would argue that he has the fairest price tag of all these spend ups. Still 1.7x points per dollar value, so spot in line with what we have with some of these other players, but only 55% combined ownership. And the reason why the ownership numbers up top aren't as drastic as what we sometimes see is because the pricing is a bit stiff. You've got 4 guys over 10 grand, all 4 of them extremely playable for tonight. In fact, they're the best plays that we have on the slate, and you can't use all of them together. So they're cannibalizing each other. Not everyone can be that mega chalk. And for example, if this was the Packers versus a shitty team, Jordan Love, guys like Josh Jacobs would be like 20 to 25% at captain. Same thing on the other side. If the Eagles were playing a half-ass team, they would probably be about double the ownership at the captain spot, which makes them a lot easier to use in your lineup. So I personally prefer these running backs in the large field GPPs, maybe these quarterbacks in cash/single entries. You don't have to worry about the leverage as much. Next up, we got an AJ Brown at $9,200. He's a bit expensive as well, at only a 1.4x points per dollar value. It's not even just your 10K plus players that are making it a bit stiff, but even this 8-9K range is probably at least $1,000 too expensive in most cases. So, an AJ Brown, not the best play in your cash/single entry lineups, but you're really prioritizing that points per dollar projection. In fact, if you're going to go up to $9,200, you might as well try and find $800 to spend up for Jordan Love, an extra $1,400 to get up to a Josh Jacobs, because the projection difference is pretty drastic there. But in the large field GPPs, what is not encapsulated by this projected points here, which is a median projection, is the ceiling, which AJ Brown has in spades. He's somebody that's got a 25 to 30 point ceiling and gets 100 plus yards. You of course get the bonus on a site like DraftKings. It's also a full PPR website, and let alone his red zone upside to score touchdown as well. If he gives us 100 plus yards, a touchdown, or 7 to 8 catches, that could be his way to the optimal lineup at flex. With anything a little bit better than that, perhaps getting him there at the captain position. So just like using these running backs at captain, and that can get you a little bit different, AJ Brown is only 7.7% at that captain position. So if you want to play a Philly-led lineup and still use the passing game, which is looking where a lot of the chalk's going to be tonight, a lot of the pass catching options on either side are the more popular players that we have, and AJ Brown captain might be a way to play that kind of game script and still get some differentiation at that spot. Devontae Smith is $9 grand, so he's only $200 cheaper than an AJ Brown. They have a similar median projection, but it's worth noting that Devontae Smith has the much better floor than an AJ Brown, and that's because of the PPR scoring that we have on a site like DraftKings. AJ Brown has the much bigger upside, the much better red zone upside, 40-50 yard play equity than somebody like a Devontae Smith. But on a site like DraftKings, we're getting a full point for every reception, and he puts up games with 7-8 receptions quite regularly. That's why he's the better play in cash/single entries, whereas AJ Brown's the better option for large field GPPs because of that big play and that slate breaking upside that we mentioned before. Romeo Doubs at $8 grand might seem a bit expensive, but you can see that points per dollar projection is actually better than both of the wide receivers on the Eagles. And while we're not arguing that Doubs is a better wide receiver than either of the two players on the Eagles, he's not. He's just talent-wise, he's not at that same level as those two. He's going to be operating as the wide receiver one for the Packers, and the reason for that are a lot of the injuries that they have on the Green Bay. He's also the wide receiver one to begin with, but with Matthew Golden hurt and potentially sitting, Dontavian Wicks, who could also be out as well, and also Tucker Kraft, although not a wide receiver, was getting wide receiver one usage for the Packers before he ended up getting injured quite severely. Romeo Doubs is now the clear alpha dog, and if we have some of these other guys out, there's going to be even more so the case. So Dobbs is currently projecting as one of the best plays that we have in this mid-tier, but it could get even better if some of those other players end up being rolled out. But he will be owned. I've got him at about 43% combined ownership, about 10% at that captain spot as well. And what I'll say about Dobbs is I like him a bit more at flex than I do at captain. I know he scored a lot more this year than what he has for the rest of his career, but he's historically more of a PPR possession-led wide receiver, kind of like a Devonta Smith. He can have those games where sometimes he'll get you a big play touchdown, but it's a lot more often where he's getting there with like 7 to 8 catches. So I like him a little bit more at the flex position because of that. Because at captain, we need a nutted performance and usually like 20 to 30 points on a slate like this, and I kind of doubt Dobbs' chances to get to that performance. Next up, we got a Dallas Goedert at $7,400, also a bit expensive, and I know it's becoming a little bit redundant, but that's really the main thing I noticed with the way that they have the lineup construction set up for the slate. Only a 1.3x points per dollar value. So in cash/single entries, that almost rolls them out of consideration in those formats. You just have much better plays around him that you can use instead. However, just like in AJ Brown, he's got red zone upside, especially with his big frame and that down in that position of the field. And he's also got a really good connection with Jalen Hurts. There are games where he'll get you 7 to 8 catches. Maybe that's matchup based when Hurts feels like he's got a better chance to get the ball to Dallas. But at 9.8 raw points, he's not standing out for cash/single entry. So it's keeping the ownership lower. I've got him at only about 20% at the flex spot. So once again, if you're trying to play a chalkier game stack, whether it's Goddard on the 4 side or even as one of the 2 buybacks for like a 4-2, he could help you get a little bit different to the field. And sure, the projection is a pretty big difference, almost a little bit over 3.5 points between player to player. But this is just a median projection. This does not happen 24/7. There are going to be plenty of games where Goddard outscores a Dobbs, and at that lower ownership mark can help you get different to the field. Next up, we got a Matthew Golden, who is currently questionable and on a lot of sports books is not being projected to play. So as of right now, I've got him siding towards more as out than active, but somebody that we'll be keeping a close eye on as we get closer to lock tonight. Christian Watson has started to play over the last couple weeks. He had been inactive to start 2025, but the first week back played about 50% of snaps. Last week played about 67% of them. And with some of the wide receiver injuries that we have on the Packers, there's a good chance that he's going to have to play more this week. So at $6,200, he is squarely in play on a slate like this. And the thing that I like about Watson, especially for large field GPPs, is that he is a big play waiting to happen. He is perhaps kind of like an Alec Pierce, the best deep play threat that we have in the NFL. He's fast. He's really tall. He also has amazing jumping ability. I've seen him high point footballs 1.5 feet over some of the other cornerbacks that he's playing against. This is somebody that could catch a 60-yard touchdown in a flash. And at $6,200, one of those plays is enough to get him to the optimal lineup. So he is about 22% at flex. It's not like he's super low owned or completely overlooked in this range. But these guys that are 20 to 25%, you throw 2 or 3 of them into a lineup, and that's going to give you the differentiation that you're hoping for in the GPPs. That combined with leaving some salary on the table is how you can make sure you're not going to duplicate yourself with 50 to 100 people. Next up, we got a Luke Musgrave, who will be tight end 1 for the Packers with Tucker Kraft rolled out. He's no Kraft, though. He's not going to have that same yards after catch ability, but 1.5x points per dollar value isn't something that's terrible either. So he's usable. You can mix him into some lineups where you're using a Jordan Love. Also about 22% ownership, so not super low owned here in this 5K range, but also not somebody we'd consider chalk either. Next up, we got the 2 kickers, and I'm going to go ahead and lump these 2 together because I love using kickers for Showdown, especially in a defensive matchup like this where we've got 2 of the top 10 units in the NFL going at it. It might be a little bit harder to score and punch the ball into the red zone when they get the ball into that portion of the field. You've got McManus with a big leg. He's also the cheaper of the 2 at a better projection. He's the one that I prefer on the favorites, but even a Jake Elliott, he's got a 6.5 fantasy kicking point projection, I should say, on the sports books, and he's just like minus 135 towards the over. So they're expecting him to be involved. He has not had very many field goal opportunities this year because of how much the Eagles go for it on 4th down. But with the stiff defense, a defense that can cause a lot of sacks, perhaps get the Eagles behind the chains when they get into the plus portion of the field, that could force some extra opportunities for an Elliott. So I'll have both of them in lineups, and Elliott's only 23% at flex. So kind of like these last 2 players, like he's getting some ownership, but he's not chalk. A McManus McManus, though, at almost 30% combined ownership, is a little bit more popular, but we'll stress that it's only about a 4% difference or 3-4% difference from player to player. So both going to be in my lineups, and I'd say McManus getting the extra steam, probably worth it because he's on the favorites. They have the higher implied team total. They should have a little bit more success on offense, and that's why he gets that little bit of a bump. Next up, we got Dontavian Wicks at $4,400. He's also questionable for tonight, but he's a little bit more expected to play. He's not as iffy as what we had with the Matthew Golden, so we'll see whether he's active or not as we get closer to 8 o'clock. But if he plays at $4,400, he's extremely usable, especially if a Golden's out, especially with Kraft out of the offense. He should command a slightly higher target share. So $4,400, somebody that we're going to be side-eyeing, but if he's out, that is going to open up some extra value towards the bottom end of the board. Next up, we'll lump in these two defenses for either side. You got the Packers at $4,000, Eagles defense at $3,800. Neither one's projecting off the board. 1.6x for the Packers, 1.4x for the Eagles side. But if you're trying to play a 4-2 or even the full onslaught 5-1 in either direction, defenses should be part of it if you want to get different to the field. And I was mentioning it before with the Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley, but if you're playing either of those two at the captain position, a clear piece of correlation with both of those running backs would be their respective defense. And that's because the running back to get to the optimal lineup is likely going to need 20 to 25 touches, and that's much more likely to happen if that team's playing from ahead. And if they're playing from ahead, that also means the defense has a much better chance to get there in fantasy. So that's why you might want to consider some of that correlation. You don't have to do it in every lineup that you have one of those running backs at captain, but 30 to 50% of the time, you might be in, maybe even more than that, maybe like 50 to 60% of the time, you might be pairing up these defenses alongside with them. Next up, we got wide receiver 3 for the Eagles. That is Jahan Dotson at $3,400. He's been playing every single week, but he's not necessarily getting targeted every single week. He's a very low floor player, but he does have some upside because when he's gotten targeted for the Eagles, he's oftentimes converted it into a big play. And it's easy to imagine why when you have two stud wide receivers playing ahead of you, you got Devonta Smith and AJ Brown, they've got to give a lot of extra attention to those two players. So Jahan Dotson sometimes gets overlooked, and you've seen him capitalize for a big play touchdown at times, but he's got an extremely low floor, only a 0.7x points per dollar value, not somebody I'd be using in cash/single entries in any cases. Next up, we got Malik Heath at $3,000. If we have some of these wide receivers rolled out, so for example, if a Golden and a Wicks both end up missing the game, Malik Heath would be squarely in play. But as of right now, only a 0.8x points per dollar value, so kind of similar to a Jahan Dotson, a little bit overpriced for the kind of scenario that we have. So currently not getting any ownership as well. So I guess in large field GPPs, you could still use them as a bit of a flyer play because even if those guys ahead of them are going to be active, you'd have to imagine that they're a bit banged up, not 100% if they're carrying this questionable tag the whole way up until Monday. So Heath might see some extra usage because of that. Next up, we got a Tank Bigsby. He's been playing a lot more for the Eagles over the last week or so. In fact, infinitely more on the offensive side of the ball. When he first got traded, he was being utilized as a kick/punt returner in most cases, but he finally started to play as the running back too. And that tells me that he has supplanted a Will Shipley as the backup running back for that team. And although it's going to take an injury or probably a blowout script for him to get enough usage to pay it off, if there's an injury to Barkley, I guess, that could get him his 10 to 15 touches right there. There are scenarios where you shouldn't completely overlook him. And if you're going to take a backup running back for the Eagles, it's Bigsby now. It used to be Shipley towards the beginning of the year. If there was some, weird freak outcome where he was going to get the touches, he's the one that would have seen the benefit. Now that's going to be Tank Bigsby though. And on the other side of the game, you've got Emmanuel Wilson who fits that same role, except that he plays a bit more regularly for Green Bay. And I think his usage share is likely to drop a little bit this week. Josh Jacobs, if you've been following the Packers over the last month, has been a bit banged up. He's been playing, but he's been playing as questionable almost every single week. Emmanuel Wilson's been playing more because of that. So I still have him projecting for 2.3x points per dollar value, the best number that we have at the bottom. So my preferred value play, if you're going to go to a pure punt at the bottom, but don't be surprised if he doesn't play quite as much as what it's been for the last week or so. Chris Brooks is more the receiving running back that you have for Green Bay. If they happen to be playing from way behind, he would see some extra usage, but that or a blowout script is really the only way that he's going to get there. We've also got a Savion Williams. He is questionable for Green Bay as well. He's been a downfield threat when he's seen the field though. So, depending on who's active at wide receiver for the Packers, there could be some value to be had. And I would say if he's active and you've got some of these other guys up top maybe out, like a Golden's out, maybe a Wicks is still playing, but like one of those two ends up missing, I'd rather have Savion if he's playing than a Malik Heath. And the reason for that is that Savion has got yards after catch ability. He's extremely athletic, one of the fastest players that we'll have on the entire football field. He could take a short gain into a big play touchdown. And, Malik Heath, I don't really see that as much with. And next up, we got a Will Shipley at $1,800. I think he's running back 3 for the Philly Eagles now, and I can't completely confirm that because he might still be number 2 on the depth chart, but we've seen Tank Bigsby get some of the run ahead of him over the last couple weeks, so Shipley personally isn't somebody that I'm planning on using in lineups. John Fitzpatrick, though, will be tight end 2 for the Packers. He is somebody that I'll be planning on using. We have a Luke Musgrave who will be the tight end 1 for them, but it must be kept in mind that he is not a stud. He's $5,400. He's being priced up too. That's why he's only at 1.5x points per dollar value. John Fitzpatrick will see the field because even before Tucker Kraft got hurt, Fitzpatrick saw the field and saw some targets at times. So now that he's the number 2 on the depth chart instead of number 3, he'll probably get even more run from that perspective. You got Xavier Gibson next. He's the gadget/returner for the Eagles. He's also seen a few offensive snaps and uses over the last couple games, but he's home run or absolute bust at only 0.3x points per dollar value. And then lastly, we got Grant Calcaterra. He's going to be the backup tight end for the Eagles. He's more of a blocker, but when Goddard gets hurt, at times Calcaterra will get targets. But even then, it's like 2 or 3 targets per game. So he's touchdown or bust. He's the kind of guy that's got to fall into the end zone to pay off that price tag. But he is only $600. And, a Fitzpatrick, like I'll be using him. He's only $1,600. A Savion is only $2,000. When you have all these studs up top that are way overpriced, but also some of the best plays that we have on the slate, having punt plays towards the bottom can be extremely useful. So for this entire spreadsheet, guys, with my entire player pool, all the updated projections throughout the day, ownership will be updated to further reflect the sentiment around the industry. You can also see my entire player pool at Flex, Captain, all the scripts that I'm using my players in, also the guys that I'm using in my cash/single entry lineups, all by joining the NFL DFS tier on my Patreon. There's a link down below to join that, only $15 a month to check out all the content that I have, and it's an absolute no-brainer to join. They've got these other websites out there that'll cost you 4, sometimes even 10 times the price per month, and they give you less information than I have on my website. So if you're somebody that's a part of one of those bigger websites, it's week 10 at this point, some of you might be frustrated with the website and the content that you've been getting, consider jumping ship over to what I've got because it's a fraction of the price. It's going to instantly save you money, and if you like the content that I have here, all the detail that I put into my analysis, you're going to really love the spreadsheets that I put together because it's even more detailed than we're able to talk about here. It's not only just the player pool stuff, but also this extra player pool notes tab, which is blacked out. It's not always blacked out here for these videos, but it is paragraphs of information on all of these players and how they're utilized, snap share rates, etc., where you can find leverage, guys that are maybe better for GPPs than cash. I know we talk about a lot of that here in this video, but everything is also written out for all my members on my Patreon. So I do this for every single Showdown slate, every single player covered in full detail, whether it's from the quantitative analysis, that's what we have with the numbers over here, or the qualitative analysis with the extra player pool notes. You guys will find a lot of extra value with that, and not only just for Showdown, but also for main slate every single week. So I'd highly recommend checking it out if you guys haven't already. And now for the prop of the betting side, where I've got one slip you guys might want to consider tailing it. It's going to be an over on Jalen Hurts' fantasy score to start. He's at 18.5 fantasy points, and for the year has only gone under in 1 game. So he's got an elite tier hit right here, and although the Green Bay defense is one of the tougher units that you have in the NFL, Jalen Hurts can get there across a variety of different scripts. Let's assume maybe they struggle in the first half and they're playing from behind in the second. He could get there with his passing usage through guys like an A.J. Brown or Devonta Smith. Let's assume that they're a little bit more competitive and they keep it, closer in the first half, perhaps even leading in the second half. He can get there with a bit of his passing usage, but also with all the rushing usage that he's bringing to the table. Add on top of that, a potential push touchdown. He's got a 1.5 touchdown line on a lot of the sports books as well. And you can see why I like this sort of value. And the only real concern would be the matchup. That defense is one of the stingier units that we have, but it's only a 1.5 point spread, pretty decent total as well. I'm expecting him to get the kind of usage that we're hoping for. Then on the other side of this is a 2.7x payout, by the way. It is a goblin prop that we have on Micah Parsons, but I would argue that the payout shift only going from 3 to 2.75x is not nearly enough for the kind of value that we have on these. I mean, we told you Hurts has gone over in all but 1 game. That's an elite tier hit right there. But let's talk about the Parsons plus EV value, because on a site like FanDuel, him to get a half a sack is minus 210. On DraftKings, he's at 0.75 sacks, so he has to get a full sack to go over that line. He's minus 157 towards the over, so he should be a goblin prop, but based on the minus 200 or more odds odds, he should be the kind of goblin prop that takes you down to 2.5 or 2.25x. Like you see like a lot of the other ones on the board, and he's being priced like something that's like minus 130 to minus 140. So there's a lot of value on that sort of an outcome. And Micah Parsons against Jalen Hurts in particular has got a ripe matchup to attack because Hurts has had 25 sacks recorded on the year, and that's before this week even starts. He's top 7 in the NFL in sacks taken, and all the other guys ahead of him, all 6 of them have already played their game this week. So Hurts is somebody that can hold the ball a little bit too long. They've got Parsons, who's also one of the most athletic defensive players that we have in the NFL. It's something else to add here, and we don't always talk about this with sack lines, is the type of quarterback that you're playing. If you're a pocket passer that you're playing against, it's going to be more so traditional sacks that get you there. But don't forget that Parsons could be chasing down Jalen Hurts on a scramble, maybe a bootleg out to the right side, and if he ends up running him out of bounds, that could be counted as a sack for Micah Parsons. Or even if it's just like a tackle for a 1-yard loss where he's trying to scramble and get back to the yard of scrimmage, that could also be counted as a sack for Parsons. So I like playing these sack overs against rushing quarterbacks because not only can you get there with that traditional sack usage, but also that's why those rushing quarterbacks tend to have higher sack numbers by the end of the year because of some of those fluke ones that are counted when they shouldn't be. So that's the Micah Parsons over. Again, 2.75x for that combination. Just like the DFS stuff that I was mentioning before, every single slip that I'm entering for the NFL this year can be found on my Patreon page. So link down below, the NFL prop tier is how you get access to those. $15 a month, same price as what I have for my DFS stuff. Gives you access to not only every single slip that I'm entering, but also the reasoning and the value behind it. So you can catch value before it ends up bumping on the sports books, but also why I'm attacking the props that I am, so you can implement that in your own process going forward. So that's all I've got on the prop side, guys. Let's cash out on this 2-leg slip. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for the Monday Night Football preview. Smash that like button if you haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. That'll include Thursday Night Football, also the main slate for week number 11, the rest of the 2025 year. You won't want to miss any of that when it drops, so subscribe so you get notified when it goes live. But that's all I've got, guys. I appreciate your support here on the channel as per usual. Also, comment down below who you've got as the top scorer for Monday Night Football for a chance to earn a free month of my Patreon. And on there is where you guys can get the spreadsheets with all my projections, my entire player pool for the slate, but also all the prop stuff on Underdog and Prize Picks. So it'll be on a first come, first serve basis. Just get the top score on DraftKings tonight correct, and you win that free month access. So best of luck there, also with all the exposure that you're going with, whether it's in the large GPPs or with any of the props or bets that you're entering. I hope you can cash out, add to the bankroll, and we can have ourselves a solid Monday night.